What's up? I'm Allie and welcome back to my channel. It's been a while. So I have done a wrap-up, like a formal wrap-up telling you about the books that I've read and enjoyed and didn't like. So it's time to play catch-up. Just a little bit. I'm not going to tell you everything that I missed in that time span of talking about because I have, I think, talked about a lot of the highlights at some point or another in that time frame. But I am going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I read at the end of last year that were kind of a highlight, and then what I've read so far this year, some of the things that I read so far this year, and then hopefully we'll be all caught up. That is where we're at. Let me tell you about some of the highlights from the end of last year so you can figure out what it is that you might like, what you might not like, and what I've been reading and how my tastes are currently. I don't really know where they stand anyway. One of the things that I read last year was I Am Still Alive, and this is a YA survival thriller about a girl injured in a car accident and her mother has died, so she has to go live with her father. The problem is her father lives in like the middle of absolutely nowhere, like off the grid. She has to take some methods to get there. And, it's kind of suspicious. And she's like, this is kind of like a weird life to live. And he's like, no, I like this. But we come to find out that he is there for a reason. Some men come from his past, kill him, and leave her out in the middle of this wilderness in the snow, like tundra snow, to care for herself and the dog. Like, no one knows that she's there. The ones that do have no way of contacting her. She has no way of contacting them. And so she has to try to live in the wilderness and fend for herself and stay alive. The other thing, though, is that she kind of wants revenge. Like, why? Come kill my dad. This isn't necessarily the most fast-paced thriller, but I really do love a survival thriller. I guess to some degree all thrillers are a little bit survival. The wilderness survival thrillers I just absolutely love. But there's just that anticipation. You know something is coming. You know bad things are going to happen. And it's like just like that constant anticipation of waiting for it to happen. So you get that stress, the stress of it all, just building up because like, the wilderness has its own set of rules, and it will do to you what it wants. And you're just kind of waiting for that to happen. So I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. It's just one of those ones that just grips you and doesn't let you go. Another one that I read is House of Hunger, and this is a gothic horror. I believe this one's also YA. This is about a girl who, she kind of lives in a not great situation, and she really is a little desperate to get out, and in doing so, she ends up killing her only family member. She leaves him for dead in order to escape, essentially, and she's feeling very guilty about this, but she ends up getting into this household and working as a blood maid. Vampires I don't ever remember being like explicitly mentioned, but basically she is in the home of a vampire and like these very high society members, and she ends up catching the eye the head of the household, and she's very enamored with her, and everyone seems to think that she is just like the most amazing. And the problem is that it kind of creates a little bit of tension between her and the other blood maids as well. Some of them are leaving and whatnot. Our main character, she's like, something isn't adding up here. Where are these girls going? What's going on? And she stumbles across some dark secrets of the blood maid lifestyle, as I'm sure you can guess. I have to say, I loved the overall vibes of this story were impeccable. The vibes were all there. I was obsessed. Like Victorian, vampire, lesbian vibes. Fantastic. Amazing. The story itself was fine. I don't know if it was anything that blew me away because you obviously can kind of predict where a lot of things are going. And the end kind of just is a bit convenient and wraps up very quickly and whatnot. But the vibes, and I think that's a very, very valid reason to read a book, is if the vibes are there and if you love vampires and you love Victorian-esque just atmospheres, I think that it's a fantastic read. I gave it a 4 stars. It was a very enjoyable read. I enjoyed the character, all the weird, gross shenanigans that were happening in this vampire world. So it didn't matter that I could see some of the stuff coming because it was still a very fun read. I didn't realize until I was kind of going through the list of books I wanted to talk about today that I never gave a formal update for House of Leaves. This was the book that I chose for my last 24-hour reading sprints. And y'all were like, oh my god, Allie, why would you choose that? And I'm like, what? Everyone talked about what a great horror book it is. I get it now. This was a really silly choice for me for 24 hours straight. This is a puzzle book. And I don't know how to explain that other than the fact that there are just like really weird, it's just a really weird setup, and there's weird puzzles, and you have to turn the pages, and you have to flip back and forth and whatnot. So you all got to watch me do this live for almost my whole reading of this. I did make it to the 24-hour mark, and I think I had like less than 20 pages left, and I just couldn't do it. So I ended up finishing it off stream. So you didn't get my full final thoughts, but I think if anyone had seen me in the 24 hours, you would know that I didn't love this experience. Maybe it was how I chose to experience it. This was a lot. I get why some people love this. So this is a weird, again, puzzle horror book, but it kind of follows two different things that are wound up into one thing. I feel like it's very hard to explain. Basically, we are following a character who has come across these files and whatnot about this like movie project and this like famous movie that like snippets were released, but then it wasn't, and there's like no one has any memory of this. So then we are looking also at like this documentation of this movie, of this house that these people move into, that like random rooms appear, and when you go in, like it's different every time you open up the doors, and like people get lost in these rooms and whatnot. I don't know who has explained this in a way that makes any sense. I don't know. Flipping back and forth between these two different things, but they are wound up in the same thing. But then there's other side pieces into this that also come together, and at some point you forget like what is the real story and what isn't, and is it real? How much of this is him like losing his mind? So there's a lot of thoughts to be had, and I know there's like a whole wiki form basically set up just for this book, and it has quite the following behind it. So it was a ride. It's confusing. I would not recommend reading this in a 24-hour period. It's very large. If you're not someone who ever likes being confused at any given point in time while reading something, don't read this. It's not for you. I'm getting a workout holding this. I gave it a 3 stars. The experience of it is interesting. It's unique. It's something that you can like, someone else has read it and you're like, oh, well, like we're part of a club now. The story in and of itself, I didn't find very creepy. I also just didn't care about. It just dragged at times. There were some parts I just wanted to skip. I didn't like basically any of the characters. I wasn't really a fan, so at times it was hard for me to feel kind of invested in it, because I do tend to be someone who is a little more character driven with stories. So this just, I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that I have experienced this book. I think I would read something else like this again, just not quite in this context. Okay, moving along. Vampires have been my thing recently. I don't know what's going on, just all the vampire content. So I also read Woman Eating. Now this is a contemporary vampire story that isn't really like anything that I've read before. It is about a young girl who is finally out on her own in life, and she's a vampire, and she has been like her whole life, and it's like modern day, and she's just trying to fit in. And it's just literally such a mundane story about her just living day to day in the world, trying to just fit in as a young adult. And so, you know, she's trying to get dates, but like, oh no, she's a vampire, and she's trying to fit in, and she's trying not to make sure anyone really is like, finds out about her and is upset about it, but she's also trying to like have a job and go to work and like have friends. And so it was a really interesting take on like just being like a normie vampire. I definitely think that this is something that you could get a lot out of in like a book discussion, because it just really puts a new lens on the vampire story. So I gave it a 4 stars. It was enjoyable, and I think it's relatively short as well. Twisted Bonds, which is the sequel, and is this the last? I can't remember. Is this the last in the Hollow Vows series? I don't recall. I love YA fantasy romance, which is what this is, and I love when there's either duologies or trilogies, and I go through phases of these, and I was very much feeling this. I really enjoyed the first one, which is about this girl who, like, she's been told she's human, she's been told all her life how bad fae and fairy world is. Sister is taken into the fairy world and is given as the bride to one of the princes there. So she decides to go into fairy and try to basically infiltrate these kingdoms and to try to get the hand of one of the princes, the Seelie prince, in order to start a war against the Unseelie to get her sister back. In doing all that, there is a kind of a curse that is taking over the fairy world, and the longer she is there, the more she learns about the fairy world and of course the Seelie, and she also meets up with an Unseelie, a rebel group, and decides that she will also work with him in order to figure out what is going on in this world. So little bit of a love triangle happening, which I don't mind. I kind of eat it up. The first one leaves off on quite the cliffhanger, so I knew I had to get to this. I needed to know what was going to happen. Also, I was rooting for a specific love interest, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as the first one. I do think that this kind of fell into a bit more tropes and whatnot, which is fine, and it definitely fulfilled my need. I like the characters. I gave it a 3.5. I do think the duology is worth giving a try if you like romantasy, and I do love these characters so very much. I can do without some of the just, like, I don't know, jealousy stuff and just like the ownership stuff, and at times I felt really uncomfortable with some of the love triangle aspects, so that probably also didn't help. But overall, the story is fun. And there's that. Off the year, this year strong, I reread Ninth House, which I enjoyed a lot more the second time reading than I did the first time, which is interesting. I gave it a 5-star my second time reading. I don't think I did my first time reading. As you can tell, an absolute blast reading this. So I reread Ninth House, and anticipation and reading Hellbent as well. Again, also thoroughly enjoyed my read of this. If you don't know, it's a dark academia, mystery, magical type thing, secret societies. Alex Stern, she can see ghosts. She's living an unsavory life. She gets pulled into a very exclusive university and is basically gonna help run some of the secret societies and, like, keep them in line. So we know in the first one that her mentor, Darlington, is missing. And of course, thank you. It is revealed in this one where he is gone and how we must get him back. But there's also some murders that have happened, and she's like, this is suspicious. Like, has to be connected to the secret societies. And of course, they're like, no, it's not. But Alex, she knows. She's like, I've been the person that people have discarded and, like, looked over, and I'm not going to let that happen to anyone else. So we get glimpses in the first one of, like, her past and whatnot and things that have happened, and we get more of that in here as well. I am of unpopular opinion when I gave this 5 stars, because when I saw the reviews rolling in from some of my friends, they hated it. Absolutely hated it, and I don't get it because I love this story. I love this world. I love the magical elements. I love this group of unlikely friends that have come together. I just really enjoyed this. And yes, I think Leigh Bardugo, the way she connects things is fascinating. The amount of times I was marking things is like, is this foreshadowing? Is this foreshadowing? Just a really good time. I had a really fun experience with it. Like a little bit of mystery and magic and just like kind of some really dark topics mixed in. Also, vampires are the theme this year, apparently. So I absolutely adored it. take that as you will. I also read Lost in the Moment and Found. This is the 8th in the Wayward Children series, and I love the Wayward Children series. It's one that I look forward to every year, and I am guaranteed to read immediately upon release, which doesn't happen with a lot of new releases, about these doors that have opened to children who do not feel like they belong in our world for one reason or another. This particular book is the first one that I feel like really touches on a very dark topic. So this one does mention child abuse in it. So our character has left our world for safety, and I felt it set the tone just a little bit differently. So a lot of the premise of the books in the series is that the children have found these doors, they've lived in these worlds, we get to see these worlds, and then at some point they are pushed back out of these worlds, and they don't fit in anywhere now. And a lot of it is about trying to figure out how they can get back, or where they can fit in, or how they can adjust, which is where the Wayward Children house comes in. So I will say I think this one might be one of my new favorites in the series. I really loved the world that we entered in this. Although this one was, I feel like, a lot more in your face with like the metaphor of it all and whatnot, the loss of innocence. I do think that it was still really enjoyable, and I thought it did it in a really clever way. Kind of like an ancient thrift store, it feels like, which I loved. So this one in particular, I think, is one of my new favorites in the series. I absolutely adored it, and I always look for 5 stars. 5 out of 5 stars. I look forward to them every year. Also read Malice. This is a YA fairy tale retelling, if you can't tell, from the point of view of Maleficent, basically. And I ended up reading this with my besties. We're doing a besties book club with Starzy and Vanessa, and I am always the last to read everything. It's fine. In this world, it's a magical world, and some people are born with magic and some of them aren't. And the thing is their blood has this magic, and eventually it runs out. But our character in particular, she is like one of the only of her kind. She has kind of, I think, I can't remember if it was green blood or whatnot, which in most cases she would probably be killed on sight. And she is kind of like just hated by everyone, because it's been said that her people before her had tried to kill everyone in the kingdom. So yeah, they like kind of frown upon her. The problem is everyone really likes the potions that she makes. So, you know, profit. They got a profit off of her. So anyway, this is kind of about that, and how she ends up coming across a piece of her history that could answer a lot of things about who she is and what she is and what her power is, since she's the only one and her power doesn't seem to work like everyone else's power. So we get into that. There's also the case of Sleeping Beauty, and Sleeping Beauty is not quite what she seems in this story either. I personally thought this was fine. It was an entertaining enough story. I will say that everything I feel like that happens in this is pretty convenient. She just happens to come across like this thing that's going to answer all her questions, and she just happens to be in certain places at the right moment, and like it just so happens that she learns this about herself in the exact moment that she needs to learn it. So there was just a lot of convenient factors to it, which, like, it's a fairy tale, that's fine. But I did think at times that the lengths that the author went to kind of just like, this is Maleficent, this is Maleficent, this is Maleficent, and, you know, was a bit much. It was a bit much, and a lot of things, like, are really just they hit the reader in the face. There's nothing that you really need to figure out, because it's basically just told to you. A lot of the things are very predictable, and not because it's part of the story, just because the writing in and of itself made it pretty predictable. Our character is a little inconsistent in her personality, in that she's like, I don't trust no one, and I hate everyone, but then goes to prove that, like, she is so incredibly naive all the time. Not my favorite. I probably won't be reading the sequel to this. I gave it a 3 stars. It was a fun time. Just this one wasn't the best for me. I also read Ring Shout, and I love P. Jelly Clark's writing so freaking much. Very good at writing like alternative history fantasy horror. After the movie The Birth of the Nation has come out, it takes place in the US. And basically, the birth of the nation ended up being like this summoning device of summoning these creatures called Ku Kluxes into our world. And they infect white people, take over white people, look like white people, whatever. And are these monsters who try to consume black people in the world and attack them. And we follow character, she has friends and whatnot who kind of hunt down these Ku Kluxes. And they have kind of special powers of their own. Some of them have fought in war, some of them have other abilities, and then our character has kind of some sort of connection with like the spirit world to some degree. There is so much packed into this tiny itty bitty story. It was so good. It's very action packed. I mean, right off the bat, you're thrown into the action. That's the thing. P. Jelly Clark does this thing where it's such a short thing, you don't really get an introduction. You're kind of just thrown in. And you learn things as you go, and you learn things about the character as you go. It's like you've been put in as if you already know them, which I think is great because I don't want a lot of info dumping at the beginning of this. I don't need it in this type of story. I don't need to know that this time period was a very hateful time period. Obviously, it has a lot of commentary on like social issues and whatnot, racial issues and whatnot. Also, a really great story to talk about hate. And what is hate? What is rightful hate? And what does that actually mean? Where does it come from? So this was a fantastic story. This is one that I also think will be great for book clubs to talk about. I gave this a 4.5. Fantastic. I will say at times I was a bit confused. I did have to reread some parts because I was like, wait. But that's a me problem. So 4.5, amazing, fantastic. I need to own this immediately. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm all over the place, was Chef's Kiss. This is a graphic novel. It's a cute graphic novel. Look how cute it is. We follow a main character who moves in with his friends into an apartment, and they're all getting jobs right after college, and he has an English degree, and he's going to get a writing job, right? Aren't we all naive when we get out of university with an English degree and think we're gonna do right things right off the bat? So anyway, he doesn't get a job. He has a really hard time finding this writing job. So he ends up seeing a help wanted for a restaurant. And he's like, well, I enjoy, cooking and baking and whatnot, so I'll give it a try. The thing is, there's trials. It's such a quirky restaurant. It's run weird, and there's a pig. There's a pig involved who has to eat the food and approve the food before it can be put on the menu. So he has to come up with and train in this restaurant and come up with these recipes and then give them to the pig. Yes. There's also a very hot cook who works at the restaurant, and they're like making eyes, Did feel at times this was pretty slow and pretty long for what it was. Like, I was reaching a point where I'm like, oh my god, are we still going? Are we still telling the story? I did feel at times maybe it was trying to do too much. There's a lot of side characters who don't really have a point, I feel like, in the story other than be annoying. Didn't really care that there were so many characters involved. They don't progress the story much. They're just kind of there. We're dealing with a lot of different things. There's like friendship turmoil and also jobs and parent stuff and romance and this weird pig thing. So it was taking on a lot. And I don't think it necessarily did it successfully. So it was a really cute story. Take it at face value. You'll enjoy it. I gave it a 3.5. So there's some of the things I've been reading recently. You'll never believe it, but I'm also currently in the middle of several vampire books. I don't know. I'm not even trying to do a vampire video. I already did one of those. If you've read any of these, what you thought about any of these, I know I don't always have the most popular opinion on titles. So I may have just shit all over your favorite book, or I might have raved about one that you've hated, and that's fine. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!